The first results released minutes ago. Mike Johnston with 24% of the vote, Kelly Bruff with 23% of the vote. Of the 16 candidates on the ballot, 2 will make it into the runoff, and the ballots that we're looking at here are all of the ballots received before today, Election Day. For some context, we were at about 25% turnout by 4 o'clock today, and we may be headed to the neighborhood of 35, maybe 40%. Lisa Calderon in third, Andy Rougeau, the lone Republican, in fourth place with 13% of the vote. On the Park Hill Golf Course development question, that is losing badly right now. Voters appear to be rejecting the development of the Park Hill Golf Course. Our coverage continues, streaming on 9 News Plus and on 9news.com.
Thanks for joining us on 9 News Plus for continued coverage of tonight's Denver municipal elections. I'm Chris Bianchi. Alton Dillard joins us now. Alton spent 17 years at the Denver clerk office, and it's his first municipal election out of the trenches there. So Alton, thanks so much for taking the time to join us and lending us your expertise. So I guess I want to start things off. We just heard from Kyle a second ago, those initial results, anything that stands out to you so far?
Not really as far as any kind of surprises. I mean, the 2 people who are merging so far, of course, are well-funded and well-connected. So one thing to keep in mind with early numbers, anything that you see by 7 p.m., those were votes that were cast prior to Election Day. And so older voters have a tendency to go ahead and vote, get it out of the way early. It's the young folks that you see running up at 6:59 and 59 seconds.
Okay, so this vote, I mean, again, we're speculating here, so bear with us a little bit on that, but you may glean from this that we may be skewing a little bit on the older side in terms of demographic of those votes that have come in, correct?
Correct. And so what people want to keep an eye out for is the 8:30 report. That will be the one that starts showing what showed up today, and then unless procedures have changed, they'll also update at 10 p.m. and 11:30. And so you'll have a much better idea by then, but some of the margins and some of the other races may tighten. Usually the trend I've seen is that the numbers continue to widen over the course of an evening, but you also have to keep in mind what I call the far northeast Denver effect. Montbello, Green Valley Ranch, neighborhoods like that have a tendency to vote on Election Day. And so I have actually seen a couple of races swing overnight, and that's why we always made sure when I was still with the elections office to make sure that people understand that the election is not official until it's certified. And remember, I'm not trying to sound all Florida 2000 here, but there is also an 8-day post-election window for military and overseas votes to be counted, and for people who forgot to sign their ballot or have a missing signature or have a discrepant signature.
And again, I just want to reemphasize the fact that we are obviously going to be doing some speculating here with some of these numbers. That said, the margin is fairly big in terms of the no vote on the Park Hill Golf Course development at a 60% no vote at this point. Is that a number that you said that you tend to see these numbers kind of widen as we head through the evening? Again, we're not asking you to call or anything like that, but is that going to be a difficult number to make up at this point?
That would be a difficult number, but again, you just never know what is going to happen, in a race like that. And so one of the things that's been some of the back chatter that I've heard, and I was having a good discussion about this with a friend of mine just earlier. There have been some people squeaking about, why does an entire city get to chime in on an area of local impact? And they're like, well, it's not like, people don't drive across town to go to Washington Park, so you can't really look at it that way. So the thing that's really jumping out at me, had this been an open mayoral race 4 years ago, development would have been the referendum issue in the mayor's race. Now it's homelessness, crime, getting downtown revitalized. Those are the issues that are hitting the mayor's race. Development outside of the Park Hill Golf Course question, it really hasn't been mentioned a whole lot.
And by the way, walking through the rest of the evening, you kind of mentioned this a short while ago. We're going to get another update in terms of these election results in about 90 minutes at about 8:30. Then we get another one at 10, then at 11:30. So over the next few hours, we're going to get another 3 updates in terms of those votes, right?
Correct. Yeah, you'll get a chance to see what's going on there, because what happens is everything that shows up in that 7 o'clock report was already in and processed by Election Day. So you're going to start seeing Election Day. And that's why it's going to be so interesting to see who had the strongest ground game. Because, especially, and I don't like to use the term down ballot because all elected races are important. But, for instance, this upcoming dump is going to be very interesting when it comes to the city council at large race. That is turning into a 4-person horse race with these 7 p.m. results. But you have to remember there's no runoff in that race. So whoever ends up emerging when the results are final, they're elected. That's it. There's no June for them. So that's going to be another one to watch tonight.
And I guess, by the way, we'll have a bit more on the city council race specifically coming up at the 8:30 update. We're going to have outgoing city councilwoman at large, Robert Kanish, joining us for more details on that. But Alton, I guess looking over those final numbers, any final takeaways, any final results here?
I would say just keep an eye on the numbers and just always remember the election is not official until it is actually certified. And again, there have been a couple of instances I can think of when now Senator James Coleman, his state representative race, he went to bed behind and woke up ahead. And the same thing happened when Happy Haynes ran for school board. Someone else was ahead, and then by the time the Northeast ballots came into the process, it swung the numbers a little bit. So I'm really going to be keeping an eye more towards 8:30, and then we may be able to see some actual trends.
Okay, so 8:30, so strap on in here, folks. We are nowhere near done with the election. That said, we do have some of those early vote results, and we're going to go show you some of those right now. But thanks for joining us here on 90s Plus for a continued coverage of the Denver municipal elections. And Alton Dillard, thanks for joining us here on 90s Plus.
Sure thing.
One. Thanks for joining us for continued coverage of the Denver municipal elections. I'm Chris Bianchi, now joined by Kyle Clark. Kyle, getting those initial results back, anything that stands out to you in terms of what we've seen so far?
I mean, I think the surprise at this point might be the margin of lead that Mike Johnson and Kelly Brough hold over the other 14 people in the mayoral field, roughly a 10-point margin. I think Kelly Brough's folks knew that the first ballot drop was going to be very good for her. Her crowd tends to be older more than anything else, and also tends to come from some of the whiter and wealthier neighborhoods in Denver that also tend to vote early. So it's a reasonable assumption that Kelly Brough's current total, percentage-wise, which is right in the neighborhood, what, 23%? 23%, may not grow. It may shrink a bit. Now, again, she's well positioned to make the runoff where she is right now. Mike Johnson, I think, especially given his historic strength with voters of color, might be in a position where he could hold his 24%, perhaps even grow his 24% as the night goes on, which would be pretty remarkable in a 16-way race to have a candidate potentially top 25%. What I'm watching now and with the next ballot drop is, can any of the progressive candidates close the gap on Brough at her 23%? If most of her base came out, voted early, they're in this 7 p.m. ballot drop that included all the ballots that came in before today, Election Day. Are there enough ballots outstanding to close the gap for Lisa Calderon, who is the Democratic Socialist endorsed candidate, currently in third place at 14.5% roughly, or back a bit from there, Leslie Herod closing in on 9% of the vote? I think both Herod and Calderon think that their vote would come in later, could come in today, but that's an awful big gap to make up. I mean, that's a 15-point gap for Leslie Herod from fourth to third place. It's a 9-point gap from third place to second place for Lisa Calderon. They're going to be hoping that they can do that with these same-day ballot returns, but that's a steep hill.
And going off of that, I know there's going to be a little bit of speculation involved here, but do you think that there are any camps in particular that might be disappointed based on what they saw so far?
Well, I mean, anybody who doesn't finish in the top two is going to be disappointed. I mean, that was the way that this is going to play out, where you've got 16 people on the ballot and 14 of them are going to be losers. You know, I mean, there's going to be a lot of very accomplished people who are going to be losers at the end of the night. Most everybody in the race is going to be a loser. It's not just a two-person race where one person wins and one person loses. I think, you know, I mean, Andy Rougeau, the lone Republican in the race, is actually putting together a fairly strong performance at 13% of the vote. I might have misspoken. Leslie Herod, she's back from Rougeau. She's not in fourth place. She's in fifth place. Andy Rougeau, the Republican, is in fourth place at 13%. I mean, he's got to be happy with that. But if you're Andy Rougeau, and again, you're also relying on an older, whiter, wealthier demographic, those votes are largely in. That said, Republicans are 9% of the electorate in Denver, and Andy Rougeau has 13% of the vote at this point. That's a strong overperformance for the only Republican in the race, especially when you consider the fact that a lot of Kelly Brough's positions historically have lined up pretty well with conservative causes. So there are probably a number of conservative voters that have decided that Kelly Brough is their candidate because she has the possibility to win a runoff, whereas it would be very difficult to see Andy Rougeau, a Republican, winning that runoff because he'd be in there with a Democrat in a city that is 43% registered Democrats and 9% registered Republicans. I mean, he would have to win a ton of unaffiliateds and peel off a bunch of Democrats to have a chance at that race. So I think some Republicans might have seen Kelly Brough as their candidate as well. So I think Andy Rougeau's folks probably pretty pleased that he's doing that well, even if he's not making the runoff. I think Chris Hansen being at 5%, Debbie Ortega being at 4%, those are both known elected names in the city. Chris Hansen was the first one up on TV with an ad that was harping on crime and homelessness, a bunch of pictures of people of color. That appears to not really be translating for him at 5%, and Debbie Ortega kind of dead in the water at 4% at this point, despite the fact that she's been in public service in the city since she was a teenager. Who's happy? The Johnson folks are happy. The Brough folks are happy. If you had told me that two people were going to have essentially a 10-point spread at the front of this field, That's pretty overwhelming in a 16-person field. I'm sorry, did you want a 30-second answer or did you want a 10-minute answer? Because I gave you a 10-minute answer.
You know the beautiful part about 90s Plus? I don't have anybody in my ear telling me, Kyle, shut up. No. On a serious note, one thing maybe where we can actually glean some insight here, Kyle.
Yeah.
The no vote on the Park Hill 2-0 question here, more than 60%. Boy, that's a tough uphill climb for the yes vote, right?
Yeah. I mean, that the Park Hill development question is getting smoked like brisket at this point. Almost a 2-to-1 margin. I guess, what is it, 60-40 right now? Again, not a huge surprise that the neighborhoods in Denver that vote earlier would be opposed to that. But you got 20% that you're going to be able to make up on that? I mean, here's the deal. Folks in Denver have already voted on this idea when they voted to put it up to a citywide vote. So it felt to me like it was going to be an uphill climb no matter what, because people have already been asked to weigh in on this and they've said pump the brakes. So that's a pretty wide margin. I wouldn't be surprised if the margin closes a little bit, but it's also just a really odd coalition of people that are on the no on 2-0, the no on the Park Hill development side. You've got the Denver Republicans, they're a no on Park Hill development. You've got the Democratic Socialists, they're a no. You've got a lot of centrist Democrats that are a yes, and then you've got the YIMBY crowd, the yes in my backyard crowd that, you know, essentially, at least on social media, want to burn people at the stake if they suggest that they're going to vote no on the Park Hill development. So it's a very odd kind of, you know, either end of the spectrum political coalition that appears to just be beating the tar out of this Park Hill development question. Fascinating, I would say, though, both of the candidates that have substantial leads in the early voting to make the runoff for the mayoral election are a yes on Park Hill development.
Huh. So how about that?
Johnson and Bruff are a yes on the Park Hill development question. The developers in general, I'm not talking about West Side specifically, developers in general love them some Kelly Bruff. Developers heart Kelly Bruff. And Mike Johnson has a perfectly happy coexistence with development types as well. So both of them, yes on Park Hill development. Voters at this point, not just a no, but a hell no on the. Can I say that on 9 News Plus?
You can say.
Okay.
Yes.
Can I say more? No. But they're a strong no, at least as it stands now. And again, what we're looking at are the results that came in before today, before Election Day, which was going into today was roughly 20% of the vote or so. And it really seems like the max that we might see in terms of turnout would be like in the 35 to 40% range, I think is what we're thinking in terms of a max. So probably more than half of the vote in. So when you start to look at 10-point margins in the mayor's race, that's significant. When you look at a 20-point margin on Park Hill Golf Course, that's significant.
All right. Well, let's go out to Luis De Leon, who's now at the Yes Party right now. And Luis, based on what we were just talking about, Kyle and I, a second ago, I cannot imagine the mood all that uplifted, I would imagine, out there at the Yes Party, Luis.
Well, actually, Chris, the people that are leading this campaign, a spokesperson for Yes to 2-0 actually told me earlier today they were expecting this result early on in the night. They specifically said that based on their modeling, it was suggesting that there would be a strong turnout for the no vote, but then they are now anticipating, rather optimistic, that around 8:30 to 10 o'clock that gap would tighten. We heard Kyle maybe saying that there is still a chance for that to happen, but obviously this is a pretty strong turnout for the no side of things. But like I said, the folks here at this watch party, this is exactly what they were expecting after the 7 o'clock result drop. As for the side opposing this measure, they're choosing not to speculate. A spokesperson sent me a statement on behalf of the campaign earlier today, simply saying that they've done everything they can to, quote, protect that precious open space and that vital conservation easement, end quote, Chris.
Thanks so much for giving us some of that insight there. I'm going to kind of send things over to Kyle for a bit more insight on what Luis just said. Luis just saying that the 7 o'clock vote drop kind of going the way that the yes votes, the proponents of yes wanted it or expected it to. Do you buy that?
I mean, I don't know. I mean, do they want people to stay at their party for the next 2 hours? I mean, you know, if they announce at 7 o'clock, you know, hey guys, this is over, then I don't know if it's a cash bar, if they've paid for the alcohol or what, but a lot of people would be leaving the party at that point. If they really thought that they were going to be down 20 points in the pre-election day voting, then what they're counting on is an enormous wave of enthusiasm from young people in Denver for developing the Park Hill Golf Course. I guess we'll find out, won't we?
We'll find out.
I guess we'll find out. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that I buy that. I think that some of what happens at these election night parties is just kind of massaging the emotions of the room, trying to keep people on a level, trying to keep people from getting too high, trying to keep people from getting too low. 20 points is a big margin to make up. Listen, if they make it up, then we'll be sitting here at 9 o'clock or at 10 o'clock or at 2 a.m. Is this on all 24/7? 9 News Plus is 24/7?
24/7.
My goodness. When do you eat and sleep? Never mind. I don't care. I mean, if we're going to be here at 2 a.m. and they've made up the margin and they're winning, well, then they're right. And congratulations to them. If you're asking me, do I buy it? No.
Okay. That said, I kind of want to quickly, Kyle, want to get your insight here from a broad perspective in a second, but city council races.
Yep.
We're starting to get some of those preliminary results in. It looks like we're maybe looking at 4 or 5 competitive races here or 4 or 5 who are in the race for the at-large.
Yep.
2 at-large seats. So
So scroll that up a little bit just so I can see it. This is the first time I'm seeing these city council at-large numbers. And remember, this is the race in which Denver will pick 2 at-large city council members, and there is no runoff in this race. So it is simply the top 2 vote getters. And this appears to be a highly competitive race at this point, in which you have what? Less than 2 percentage points separating Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez, Penfield Tate, Travis Leiker, and Sarah Parody. So you essentially have a 4-way race for 2 seats for city council at large. Serena Gonzalez Gutierrez is the state representative who is looking to leave the legislature and come into Denver City Council. A fairly progressive candidate. She was not the candidate endorsed in that race by the Democratic Socialists. They're running Sarah Parody and only Sarah Parody. They only endorsed one of the 2. Sarah Parody currently running in 4th place in that race, in that pick 2 race. Running 2nd and 3rd are Penfield Tate. Penfield Tate, of course, involved in Denver politics for decades and decades, ran 4th for mayor in 2019. That campaign kind of never really caught fire for him, but he's currently running 2nd in that city council at large race. He's a little bit tougher to pin down politically. I think most people would describe him as kind of a centrist Democrat, but he was very opposed to the development of the Park Hill Golf Course. And he's got some other positions, which I don't know if Park Hill Golf Course, if that's really kind of a progressive litmus test, but he's got some more progressive positions. And then Travis Leiker, who had a lot of support from the business community in particular, is running 3rd in that race. So that's kind of fascinating. You've got Tim Hoffman back at 12% in that race. The leaders, again, I should have said, are between like 17.5 and 15.5 percentage points in that race. Tim Hoffman back a bit, so not out of it. But that's kind of interesting. And Marty Zimmerman, the Denver Post endorsed candidate, not doing very well at all, 8.4% in that city council at large race in the first ballot drop.
And by the way, there's a 350 vote gap between number 2 and number 3 right now, which would be Penfield Tate and Travis Leiker. And maybe to what we were talking about earlier, Kyle, with the potential older, whiter skew to the vote, Sarah Parody with maybe a few hundred votes behind.
She probably likes where she is. Yeah, I would think that she likes where she is. I think if there's anybody in the top 4 who might have a tougher time picking up some of the later votes, maybe it's Penfield Tate. Although I'll be honest with you, I mean, here's the deal. I mean, I live in the same part of town as Penfield Tate, and you see a lot of Penfield Tate signs along with Lisa Calderon signs. And you see Penfield Tate signs with Candice Tabaka signs, which is interesting because Penfield Tate is not necessarily an ideological ally of theirs, but you see a lot of folks in the neighborhood, anecdotally speaking, the yard sign test, who are interested in Tate if they're voting for Elisa Calderon or they're voting for a Candy Cibaka, who are both Democratic Socialist endorsed candidates. So I wouldn't rule out the fact that Penfield Tate could still be competitive just because he has a base of support in kind of old what you might call old Denver. I don't know that he necessarily would be out of it at this point. I think that's still too close to call in that four-way race.
And before we get on out of here, Kyle, a couple of quick questions for you. One, are we able to glean from these early results what voters are prioritizing, maybe what they're not? Is it too early? It's fair to say it's too early.
I think it's too early. I mean, one takeaway that you could have is that if you're going to run for mayor, it helps to have a pant load of money.
So the Fair Elections Fund.
You know, I mean, the Fair Elections Fund on top of just a pant load of money. So let's look at contributions for the mayor's race. Andy Rougeau had $910,000 in individual contributions. At least $750 of that came from Andy Rougeau himself. His dad is the CEO of Sephora. I mean, which I don't knock Andy Rougeau for that, because like we said here before, if you don't believe in yourself, who else is going to believe in you? So Andy Rougeau believed in himself to $750,000, and we're going to find out tonight whether Andy Rougeau set that money on fire or whether it's going to pay off for him. But then following that, Mike Johnson, $695,000 in individual contributions. Kelly Brough with $677,000, and you got to go down $300,000 from that before you get to another candidate in that race. So, you know, shocker, it helps to have a ton of money. And then you layer onto that the Fair Elections Fund. This is the first year for that taxpayer-approved matching fund. And where does it go? Well, it goes to people who raise a lot of small donations from Denver. And guess who that was? Hey, Kelly Brough and Mike Johnston. The two of them combined brought in $1.3 million in taxpayer matching funds. That is 39% of the total fund that went to the mayor's race. Everybody else split the remaining 61%. So, in other news, money is green. It helps people win elections. Both of them were strong candidates. Don't get me wrong. They were strong candidates. But they were strong candidates that were supported by a ton of money. Oh, let's talk about outside money. Let's talk about independent expenditure committees. These are the committees that aren't allowed to coordinate with the campaigns, but they kind of wink, wink, nod, nod. You know, here's what we should talk about. Mike Johnson had $2.2 million spent for him by independent expenditure committees. Kelly Brough had $984,000 spent. That's the reason why you see their ads every 2 seconds on TV. Do you have ads on 9 News Plus?
We do.
Hey, how about that? So you might see some Mike Johnson and Kelly Brough ads on 9 News Plus because other people are paying for them, for those ads to say vote for them. So anyway, what's my takeaway? My takeaway is that they're both fairly centrist candidates who had a ton of money behind them.
And the money still matters, despite the fact that the Fair Elections Fund designed to maybe make, at least bring in a bit more parity, right? That was the intention behind it.
The idea is that it gets some people into the race because it matches 9-to-1 donations of, I think, $50 or less. So the idea is to give a cash infusion to people who don't necessarily have a ton of political connections. I will say, perhaps running counter the idea that money is everything, you got Elisa Calderon running third at 14%. Elisa Calderon, at last check, had raised $79,000. $79,000 in individual contributions compared to Mike Johnson's $695,000, Kelly Brough's $677,000, and there's an independent expenditure committee that's spent a cool $24,000 for Elisa Calderon compared to Mike Johnson's $2.2 million. So you want to talk about somebody who's punching over their weight when it comes to money raised? It's Elisa Calderon. I mean, she got almost 19% of the vote in 2019. She's a well-known name in progressive circles, somewhat of a known name in the city, but not somebody who was able to raise a whole lot of money. But people are voting for it tonight, 14% so far.
We'll get more results coming up at 8:30, and we'll continue to have more coverage coming up at 8:40. We'll have another segment, and we'll discuss this at length. And we're going to get into a bit more detail with Robin Kanish coming up on the city council races specifically. So that's coming up at 8:40 right here on 9 News Plus. In the meantime, we're going to take a little bit of a breather. Kyle, we do not broadcast 24/7.
You don't? Oh, thank goodness.
I do sleep. I do eat sometimes. Yeah. Sometimes go to the bathroom and do other things. So
I assumed all those things happened in this box where we're sitting. No, and it's not a kennel. No, it's just a workplace. All right, very good.
So we'll see you coming up here again at 8:30. We'll have more elections and we'll have more analysis coming up at 8:40. Thanks for joining us here on 9 News Plus.